So today we're going to be talking about some post harvest of hemp for grain. I'm not entirely sure what Jeff's going to cover, but I said anything after combining is game. So he's quite an expert in growing hemp. How long have you been growing hemp, Jeff?
Since 98. So my math is poor, but a little over 20 years, I guess.
Yeah, so he's got some experience and not just growing, but then also, how do you handle it coming out of the field, storing and drying, and then what happens to it after that? And so Jeff, um, Kostuik, I always
Yeah,
beat up
perfect.
your name. I did it
Perfect.
right this time.
Yeah,
Oh
right on.
man, that's so good. Enough years, enough years. So Jeff is joining us, but you're not from HG. Are you still with Hemp Genetics International, or are you on a new?
I think I can officially announce it, Heather,
Okay.
as
Yep.
of about 8 minutes ago. So, so I will be resuming my position with Hemp
Oh,
Genetics,
well, it's
and so,
awesome.
yeah, absolutely. That's the first announcement. So,
All right, perfect. Okay, well,
yeah.
Jeff is got a lot to share with us, and I'm gonna let him share a screen and get going. So everybody knows, type the questions in the chat box or the Q&A box works better, and we'll get to them at the end of his presentation. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Heather. Yeah, so just taking a look at sort of the previous presentations that you've been accustomed to or have the ability to see, I'm hoping that I sort of fall in line and at least don't contradict, at the very least, some of that. So I will touch on some agronomy, and the only reason being that how important that is to produce a high quality food product, and the reason for such. So hopefully we won't spend a lot of time there, but if there's questions, I can always go back. Okay, why do we want to actually harvest hemp for grain? Because it's good for you, essentially. And essentially is a bit of a pun. So it has essential fatty acids that are very good for us, the omega-3, omega-9. It's a tremendous protein, plant-based protein. Carbs, it's got some dietary fiber when we're consuming with the hull or the shell on, but the main reason is that it is good for us, and it is a very nutritional food. In fact, it's been declared as one of the most complete foods that is out there. And so as processors, this is the list of products that we process for, and looking at two separate I guess processes altogether. So there's the dehulling of hemp seed or toasting hemp seed. So that's consuming a complete seed or nut. And it is called a nut because if you take a look at the middle here, this hulled hemp seed, you do notice that there's, the seed is somewhat round, but there does look like it's some flat side to it. So it actually is like a peanut or a sunflower seed where there's two pieces to it, and when you dehull it, they separate as such, and thus we tend to call it a hemp nut. The hemp seed oil is a different process altogether, and we'll kind of go through that process of actually cold pressing. And one of the things, of course, is to acknowledge or at least reiterate the difference between hemp seed oil and CBD oil. Hemp seed oil sells by the liter at respectable prices, I guess, where CBD oil is many times hundredfold as far as the cost. And so hemp seed oil is used primarily as a culinary type oil, similar to forget the name of it. Anyway, it's not a frying oil is what I'm trying to say. And so it's used much more for salads, etc., and for baking. The secondary process in creating the hemp seed oil is you're left with the meal. And with that meal, we can sift that meal. And then when in doing so, we can make different varied amounts of protein powder. So about as fine as we could physically sift it, the highest essential or highest protein that we can extract from it or is about 50%. And again, so each different percentage has a different baking use or a different ingredient use. And that is what we are, is we don't have, you're not going to find HPS held hemp hearts in the grocery store, but many of our customers utilize this as an ingredient, and that's exactly what we are, as a food ingredient supplier, not necessarily have um, our own branded product. So what do you need to avoid if you're looking at getting into dehulling hemp seed? And there are a number of different things that you should be taking a look at. So if we just quickly go back, and what we want to see sort of is this is a lot of white hemp meat, I guess you could call it, and try to keep as much of the foreign material or material that has aged in the bin or in processes that we'll discuss soon, and not be consuming that. And it's a visual thing per se, but more importantly, we really only have one chance to attract new consumers to the product, and we want to make sure that the experience that they have is a consistent experience. So I often suggest that whether it's a fast food restaurant, if you have a Big Mac in Vermont or you have a Big Mac in California, essentially you have a pretty good idea what you're going to get and what your expectation is. And so I think that's very important for the industry to make sure that we we maintain a quality standard that consumers can trust. So this again, some of the benefits of hulled hemp seed. Again, perhaps I'm speaking to some of the, preaching to the choir here, so to speak, if you've been interested in hemp. But this is one of the main reasons, and some of the marketing that we need to do to move the industry forward. And again, on the cold pressed oil side, the benefits and sort of the characteristics that we want to look for in producing a high quality product. Now, aside from visual, these are sort of the dirty little buggers, I guess you could say, as far as what is behind the scenes, and the little bugs and stuff that we don't want within our food product, to make sure that we don't make anybody sick. And so we have a very stringent testing program that tests for microbiological limits. So peroxide value is often associated with shelf life. So the higher the peroxide value, essentially that means that seed or grain has been damaged to some extent, whether it's just a cracked seed coat, and oxygen has gotten in there and has started to essentially make that oil rancid. And again, looking back at that first picture with the little yellow hull meat, I should say, that's again, that's a rancidity that's starting to happen within that seed. Whoops, sorry. Standard plate counts, total coliforms, E. coli, salmonella, mold and yeast, and gluten. We do. It's not that hemp has gluten, but as we move into, of course, we're not growing hemp on hemp on hemp, and there has to be a rotation associated. If we're growing varieties that are shorter and are easier to harvest, then that could cause problems with wheat or other gluten type grains that are basically there as a weed. THC we do have to test. There's very little THC, of course, in it, next to none, like very, very, very little. Most of THC or any cannabinoid is, as we know, found mostly in the flower. And of course, pesticide residues is extremely important. So to give you an idea on what the process is, when we contract with a farmer, we take that raw hemp seed and we send it to a third-party cleaner. And cleaning right off the bat is a little bit of a sticker shock, I think, for a lot of producers that are used to growing our traditional crops like wheat and, for us, canola or soybeans, where the product that's cleaned out of it is at a minimum of a percentage. So example, canola for us, if we have anything more than 1% as far as screenings, then we've kind of done a questionable job as growing that crop as cleanly as possible. When we're cleaning for hemp, because there's no kill stop in in any of these processes, we aren't using heat because heat will start to degenerate and cause issues with the nutritional value that we have to offer. So we clean very stringently to 99.95% purity, in fact, and particularly in hulled hemp products, as you saw, we don't want any weed seeds. We don't want anything in that sample that doesn't look anything like hemp. And we'll get into sort of some of those issues a little bit later in the presentation too, as to how we prevent that. Then it goes through the dehulling process. You get your hulled hemp seed. It's tested again, and that's what the quality control means, and then packaged and ready. And so there's a few different things associated with the hemp oil, as I mentioned. Up on top, we have the actual hemp product of oil, and then we've got sort of what we consider the byproduct, but is also nutritionally beneficial to us as the hemp powder. So that is the press cake. It's milled and grinded, separated, and packed. Everything, again, once again, is clean to that 99.95% purity, so that we don't have those physical abnormalities within our samples. And then to back that up, you have to have a number of different acronyms associated with your product to make sure that you have the consumer's confidence in what you're doing. So in particularly GFSI, food safety schemes, very important to make sure that your establishment is up to date and is audited and meets the requirements for safe food products. Again, the last thing we want is anything bad happening to our consumers with regards to health or any recalls. It's very costly and just does not do the industry very good. So we'll kind of switch a little bit now that we know what we want to get and how do we get that, as if we are providing farmers with advice on how to provide a good quality product to meet the expectations of the processor. So agronomy, it's kind of, I guess, a bit more of my forte. It's where I spend most of my time. However, I want to sort of relate it back to what we were talking about earlier here to sort of drive home the importance of each of them. So growing hemp successfully, of course, you have to know what the market is demanding. And then how do you supply as a farmer good quality hemp? And of course, it takes a systematic approach to maximize that quality. So again, proper planning, the agronomics, and particularly harvest and storage practices, which we'll spend a little bit more time on at the end here to again, emphasize the importance of that. What are you looking in when you're trying to grow hemp? You know, these are some of the things that you want to make sure that you put the check mark beside. So crop rotation history, I talked a little bit about that. So wheat as a gluten product, if we are going to say that we are gluten free, then we must make sure that there isn't any volunteer hemp grown in that field that we cannot control, particularly with the shorter varieties as mentioned. Wheat will sometimes be extremely difficult to clean out of hemp. Now, we utilize a cleaning system with a number of different, either it's indents, gravity tables, but also optic sorters, meaning that it takes as the crop flows over top of a camera, the seed cleaner is actually able to take a picture of what that seed looks like. If it does not match what is programmed for, then it'll shoot out a puff of air and actually kick that debris out from the sample. So it's really, you know, those sorters were 20 years ago extremely expensive. They're still extremely expensive, but more and more of our seed cleaners in Canada here, because of the different crops that we grow, utilize them. So an optical sorter is quite important. Your herbicide history, again, no residual herbicides. Hemp is not very tolerant to many herbicides, and so it's made it difficult. In Canada, we do have some herbicides that are registered under the minor use program to be utilized in hemp, and we know that they are, you know, they have the MRLs to match and to be accepted into the safety of that food product. But in the U.S. currently, most of the herbicides that are listed are biological herbicides or pesticides. Fertility is an important one. Now, you wouldn't think that as much for the food processor, but it is in fact important so that we can, the fertility and plant establishment is our herbicide, particularly in the US. So whether you're growing organically or if you do not have the tools in your toolbox to spray a certain weed out of there, then you got to make sure that you have the crop off to a good start and well fertilized so that it is your crop and you don't have problems with weeds. So again, what are we looking for? Again, these are the important things, and I'm sure that you kind of went through that with your general hemp agronomy. I hope it was, but essentially one of the biggest issues is excess water, and on both sides of the scale, excess or a lack thereof water. So this is what happens. This is a breeder plot of ours that there was a rain event where water was pooled in a low depression of part of the field over a period of time. This is what you see. You see a chlorosis of the growing point. It just starts to stunt. And when that happens, of course, that gives weeds the opportunity to grow within that. So we want to make sure that we pick a proper field that, we don't have a lot of these issues. This is an example of a field that should not have been seeded to hemp in a large way, just sort of, and this is a hemp field, to be quite honest. This is a pedigreed seed field, mind you. We're able to make to use of it and clean it. But all of these little areas, these depressions, if hemp isn't growing there because of the moisture and it died off, of course weeds are going to come in, and those are the things that we need to try to clean out. And we're going to be cleaning out some good hemp product as we aggressively try to make sure that that product meets our requirements. So variety selection, very important also. Where do you get research? And thank goodness Heather's been doing some of this early on, and the group, the UBM, is somewhat scarce, and you want to try to get localized data. The more site years, the better. Strip trials are okay. What are you looking for within that data? So yield, of course, just like any other commodity crop, yield is important. So whether the variety can yield anywhere from 400 pounds per acre up to, say, 2,000 pounds per acre. That's your grain yield. What about the oil content within that variety? There's a difference there. And if processors are actually providing you with a list of varieties that they prefer, that's what meets their processing needs. So certain varieties certainly have a higher oil percentage. Some dehull better than others with efficiencies. So it's important to know who your buyer is and to try to get their advice, I guess, as far as what they would like to see as far as a variety. Disease susceptibility, there is varietal difference there for sure. Herbicide tolerance, again, as the US moves into minor use and herbicide use, certain varieties have a higher tolerance to certain herbicides than others, and make sure that you find that out, because as an example, if you spray something like bromoxynil, which is a broadleaf weed killer, on a specific variety of hemp that's very popular in Canada here, you would best make sure that you're fishing for the next at least 3 weeks, because you are not going to want to see what that field looks like. The leaf burn on it is quite extensive. And in a couple cases, it actually does cut into grain yield. Many cases it doesn't. But maturity, and we'll talk a little bit about photoperiod sensitivity right now. And basically how that affects the maturity of a crop and whether they're shelling. So within Canada, we have what's called the list of approved cultivars, and this is a dated one. This is from 2017. So what we have to do in Canada is we have to plant pedigreed seed every year. So there's no bin run seed. There has to be a blue tag on that bag, and that gives not only the farmer, but also the processor the comfort, I guess, to say that that variety that person is planting, first of all, it has a certain germination regulation that it has to meet, a minimum germination regulation. It actually has to look like that variety that is supposed to be there. And so it really is a bit of a risk mitigator for both the farmer and the processor. And it also, this is essentially how we regulate our THC testing, is so every pedigreed field production should be tested unless they are in, and you can see here in the exempt from THC testing. So some of our varieties here, CRS1, it's been around forever. It's kind of the variety that is all other varieties are tested against. It's been tested so much that it is exempt from THC testing. So we do not, the pedigree seed grower does not need to test it. The commercial grower does not need to test it. We just know that that variety is very consistent and very stable. And again, that's what pedigreed seed kind of brings to the table. So CFX1, CFX2, also two of our varieties that have been around for quite a while and don't require that testing. Now over here, we've got Katani, Piccolo and Grandi, where are we, right up in here? Those still require testing because they just do not have enough data points behind them to do that. So again, I said, you know, take a look at the site years. How many site years has that been tested? So again, CRS1, 21 site years. It's been tested. It is the provincial check. This again is from 2019, I guess. This is later actually, probably this data comes from about probably 2015 actually, but a number of the different varieties, the yield percentage of the check, and over the 20 some years, this is predominantly what my background has been, has been an applied research agronomist, and I currently am in charge of or chair the variety, national variety testing, and then also the testing for each of the provincial. So again, important. And what I've found is you know, CRS may lead one year. A variety that's not ours is a high yielder is called X59 here. A very good high yielding variety also. Joey, Kanda, you know, they're all good varieties, good solid varieties, but have different plant characteristics. The majority of what you just saw too would be considered phototropic plants, and they are short day plants, which require shorter days to flower. So essentially what that means is that prior to the summer solstice of June 21st, those plants are putting on biomass to begin with. Once it detects that those days are getting shorter, then it actually starts to send out its reproductive system. So that is really important in knowing what that plant structure is going to look like at the end of the day and whether it's going to be competitive enough in the process. So as we see, you know, there's different plant structure types such as sativa, indica. This is probably predominantly more of a CBD looking type variety. This is more of an industrial hemp type. What I would like to see is less of these bottom branches and most of the seed head up in the top part of the, and again, that's to aid in harvest. And anytime you're able to aid in harvest, again, we are looking at spending more time on making sure that our product is handled properly and less time untangling components within our machine. So that's why it's very important to sort of get a variety and what we call the harvest index is make sure that that product or that crop is easily harvested. So this is just a picture of a Katani field. Again, more of what I tend to call, it doesn't really look like a palm tree, but having that seed head closer to the top so that we're able to harvest easier. And here's just a happy student from my past days harvesting for fiber production. Planting rates or planting density. Here we have, this is actually a trial that I ran last year with feminized and CBD varieties over here with a much lower planting density, and also just the way the plant comes out of the ground and how aggressive it is. These are all the grain and fiber varieties in this part here. These are all the CBD varieties. So quite a difference in how quickly this is all seeded on at the same date also, which is amazing. So you can see that the genetics and the vigorousness, I guess, or the how they come out of the ground and start to compete with weeds, etc., is quite important. So the picture on the right is the same angle, actually a little bit more on the fiber side. This is the picture of the same angle of those two different sets of varieties. So just shows you that how quickly, once hemp gets its roots underneath it, how quickly it can start to outcompete with weeds. But it's important to note that we need to use everything at our disposal to make sure that we give hemp the ability to get to that stage. So with that, we want to make sure that we seed shallow. For the grain and fiber, we're looking at anywhere from 25 to 30 pounds per acre seeding rate, higher seeding rates for fiber, and warm soils. Hemp just does not like cold, wet feet, and can be a problem. This is a little bit more maybe for us on the prairies here. I'll show you a video right away, but essentially, if you're using a seeding equipment that has air delivery system, again, you want to make sure that because of that tender seed coat of hemp, that you don't cause any issues there with cracking and affecting the germination. This is a busy slide, but I just want to point out a couple different ones. So Finola is, again, it's a high yielding variety. It's got a very small seed though. When we take a look at the grams per thousand kernels, Finola comes in at about 13.1. So when we're targeting a specific seeding rate, let's just say we wanted to target 20 pounds or 25 pounds per acre. Let's just take a look down here. So the target seeding rate is 100 target seeds, 100 seeds per meter square. So when we're doing that, when we're seeding this small seeded variety, we're actually putting on about 18 pounds per acre, but we're still making sure that we have that target plant density of 100 seeds. In comparison, a very big one again is either X59 or CRS at 17.3 grams per thousand kernels. We're actually seeding just under 24 pounds to the acre. So important to do the math in that, and I'm sure those that have experience with soybeans and other crops and corn kind of have an idea there. So back to this seeding. This is actually our seeder that we use on our farm here. We farm for pedigreed seed production, air seeder. So in these, having trouble with that part. These manifolds here, every time I move my mouse, these manifolds here. So the primary manifold comes in here, delivers the seed into this the secondary manifold, and if our wind delivery system is too high, once the seed starts to bounce around in this secondary manifold, you can get a big issue with the seed being crushed. It actually looks like crushed coffee or coffee grounds in there, and therefore your seeding rate goes out the window. So again, important. Fertility, very important. And I'm sure if you've heard me speak before, this is the slide that we did a plant nutrient uptake. It's a hungry plant. And so don't fall into the false pretense, I guess, or the false information where hemp can be grown on very low nutrient soils. And it can grow, but it's not something just to survive. We want it to actually produce a healthy crop. And again, producing a healthy crop helps hemp suppress weeds. Hemp will not kill weeds, but it'll certainly suppress weeds. And that's what we want to do, is make sure that we give hemp every advantage to do so. Now, on the flip side, if we get into too high densities and we don't have enough airflow, hemp is also susceptible to disease such as sclerotinia or botrytis. And the disease itself, for the most part, on the prairies in particular, is not an economic disaster. There are areas, and we have to be careful in Vermont too, where the relative humidity may indeed and increase crop rotation. We're having hemp in the rotation to increase that disease, and other crops carry it, of course. But the culprit, or the thing that really makes a difference within the processing, is this sclerotia body right in the middle here, which you can imagine that if that breaks in half and escapes both the optical sorter or any other cleaning mechanism, it's not a very pleasant sight. If you open up your bag of hemp hearts and you see one of those, it's, I'm sure you can use your imagination as to what that person thinks that is, and it's usually goes to a mouse excrement or something. And so that results in phone calls to the company and saying, well, what is this? So that is more of an issue than the actual disease economically itself. So we're getting into harvest here. So this was my combine of choice back in the day, and really just for the ease of making sure that, you know, I could stick a summer student in the back if it ever got plugged. And Heather knows about that, that we went through their harvesting equipment and kind of pointed out sort of areas where you might have trouble. This is the combine that I utilize now. And this is the type of trouble that I'm talking about. And again, you know, we're kind of wandering a little bit off of food quality, but this is a very important aspect, because as a combine operator, when I'm looking at the tank, that's what I want to be looking at. How clean of a sample do I have coming in? You know, am I throwing grain out the back? Am I being as efficient? Am I cracking any seed? This is just another distraction that takes my focus away from the actual job that I'm supposed to be doing. But a very quick fix with some PVC pipe and some duct tape takes my mind away from that, so I don't have that wrapping issue. This is in the back of the combine. It's off as the product comes off the rotor, goes into this beater that pounds the fiber back onto the ground essentially, and it gets wrapping in there. If it gets wrapped up too much, all of a sudden you have smoking belts out the side of the combine. Again, you're distracted. Another extremely important aspect of providing a good quality grain is knowing what the moisture is. So if we move back here, this, with shorter varieties, with harvesting at the proper timing, this is kept to a minimum. And so that is important. But when we do that, what we found is we need to harvest at a higher moisture. And so hemp is considered dry at 9% moisture. And what we want to do is start our harvest process likely closer to kind of anywhere sort of a minimum of 12% up to as high as 18 or 19% moisture. And that, as I said, that means that the stalk that is going into the combine still has all the pectin and lignin that is keeping that stalk somewhat flexible. Those fibers are not just exploding in the combine and then wrapping on everything. They're held together to a certain degree, and they go out the back of the combine, and the seed stays in the combine. But if you don't know what your moisture is, then you are really behind the 8 ball. And so this is a moisture meter that is used in Canada a fair bit. It's Labtronics 919. You can get them in the US too, or I know Dickie John, I believe, popular moisture meter in the US has charts also for hemp. But what we need to do is, and this is the point where we're fairly lucky, I guess, within Canada and our canola industry to have the proper infrastructure. So hopper bottom bins. So we try to harvest the crop at that 15-16% moisture. For a number of reasons. You leave it much longer, you start to get shelling, you get bird activity, just a number of different things that can happen. So once we get it in the combine, into the trucks, then we put them into these bins at this high moisture rate. Turning on aeration fans starts to push the moisture out the top of the bin, but you can see it's a very small actual opening, moving a high volume of moisture up through there. So it's very important that we don't fill the bin to the complete top, and then that we can empty the bin very efficiently and very quickly so that we don't have any hot spots within the bin. This air, of course, is going to take the path of least resistance. If you have any chaff or anything, that the airflow will go around that. And that's the importance of being able to have a hopper bin where you don't have to manually shovel it out of a flat bottom bin, and you can circulate it, put it into this bin, and keep that process going as far as drying, getting that grain down into a dry long-term storage of 9% moisture, as I stated. You can certainly use grain dryers to do so. Some of the newer varieties, some of the newer dryers have the ability to really lower the temperature that you're drying at too. So what we want to do is make sure that, as you notice that very first slide, we did have toasted hemp seed, but please let us toast the hemp seed. Don't toast it in the dryer. So keeping the dryer low and slow is extremely important. So you know, having the plenum no more than say 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the grain shouldn't get any hotter than 100 degrees. Again, we're trying to make sure that we don't toast and then don't damage any of that nutritional value that we have in seed. But again, very important for long-term storage and to keep that microbial load down, because again, so dry, low, and slow to avoid toasting. These are the factors for bacterial growth: time, temperature, and moisture. And so temperature, we can sort of have some um, some ability to change that if we're using a dryer. Otherwise, we're using ambient temperature of outside in those aeration fans. The moisture is what it is, and what we have to deal with is time and making sure that we get that moisture away from there as quickly as possible. So again, long-term storage, you want to make sure that you can maintain cold and dry grain. That again helps limit that microbial activity within there, minimizing damage. We actually switched over to conveyors for the most part. We're also, it's a fairly lofty price tag, but we're also dealing now more so with peas, soybeans, and so it's utilized throughout the farming system. But having an auger spinning around, you're definitely going to have some steel on steel, I guess, essentially, or close to, and seed cracking. So try to operate them, if you're operating them, just augers as low as possible and as full as possible. And preventing contamination. So you clean your harvest and handling equipment. So back here, at the end of the day, you'll have some hemp that's got a high moisture hung up on different areas. The hopper's swept out every evening, because again, that's going to be a hot spot for that microbial activity. In your bins, cleaning out the bins properly, that the crop previous to what you are putting in that bin. Again, we've got a fairly stringent cleaning process, but there's not much that we can do as far as a kill stop after the fact. So again, eliminating the opportunities for rodents and birds to get into that bin is extremely important, because we're taking that hemp seed basically for dehulling. We're smashing against a steel plate, separating the hull from the meat, and that's what's being served to our consumers. So again, we want to make sure that it's a high quality product. And invest in moisture cables in those bins, know what's going on in those bins. Monitoring all the time is extremely important. So I'm not going to show you this whole video. This is kind of a bit of my pride and joy fields. After 20 years, I think this was one of the best fields that we were able to produce. This indeed was a pedigreed field, but really, Mother Nature kind of really helped us out with this one, provided us with just enough moisture, so it made it almost like an irrigated type situation. But you can see we're pretty decent here without a lot of drowned out areas. There's a couple in here, but we were able to control weeds within that. And this is really sort of the density that you want to see, and it's just one of those fields that I was quite happy with over time. So with that, I'm happy to entertain. Hopefully, I'm not over time, Heather, and I can take some questions. Or
no, you're not over time. It's great.
Okay.
Awesome. I have a bunch of questions myself, but
Okay.
everybody knows the drill. So if you guys and folks can put your questions in the Q&A box, I will ask Jeff. And one question I had, Jeff, was, are you using heat to dry the seed or just forced air? Because I know this has come up with us before, drying canola and sunflowers, explosions and fires and
Yeah.
yeah.
Extremely important. So yeah, but very low heat. So I've taken out, there's one slide that I have where we do have supplemental heat. So it's propane fired. But it's actually more of a radiator type system. So there's coils that are heated and the air is drawn through those warm coils. And that's, once we get it down to probably around that 12, 13%, we'll kick in some supplemental heat, particularly if we're, our ambient temperatures here in the fall time, similar to what you guys are experiencing, you just don't have enough heat units in the day there to sort of help that drying process. So low and slow. So you can either attach supplemental heat to those aeration fans, or by using a dryer. And again, making sure that the grain doesn't get any warmer than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you still have to be, especially on dryers, you still have to be extremely cognizant of the fact of fires and even harvesting. Not, Vermont's not going to have the issue. We don't have the issue as much in Manitoba, but in Alberta, with a very dry relative humidity throughout the growing season and high winds, they actually will blow the dust, hemp dust
Wow.
off combines with a
Yeah.
leaf blower in between loads, because even through static electricity, there's been fires started similar to sunflower or those other highly combustible type crops. So yeah, you
Right.
have to make sure you're aware of that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking. The funnel bottom, cone bottom bins, they kind of dot the landscape here because of the dairy producers.
Yep.
They sort of have been a traditional thing for holding grain, not the size that you have there, but I hadn't really thought about that before.
Yeah.
And
I,
yeah.
I I know it's an issue, sort of like when, we had a lot of testing done in Kentucky, North Carolina, where they, have peanut dryers. So what I show, of course, is what we have to offer. But what I'm trying to emphasize, I guess, is we need to figure out what works best in your region and what you have available. But the important thing is that, probably no more than 4 hours goes
Mm,
by from the grain in the hopper of the combine by the time you start to get air on it, particularly at that 18-19% moisture, because that's where it starts to get into some issues with
yeah.
regards to micro
Okay. That's
activity.
that's good to know. There are some questions in the Q&A box, so I should get to other people's questions.
Sure.
Um, so somebody was asking about the last photo. How many plants per acre or hectare are there, or what was it seeded at? Maybe is
You're probably looking at close to 750,000 plants per. So hemp has anywhere from 25 to 28,000 seeds per pound, and that yeah, so that field there, it averaged just under 2,000 pounds per acre of production. But that was, like I said, that's probably double what I would normally, we kind of target, I guess, 1,000 to 1,500 pounds, and that one we just hit a home run on. With, again, Mother Nature lofted us one, and we just happened to luck out with that one. So,
but
but
you're shooting for 100 seeds per meter square when you
I, w-
seed?
I would up that. I would up
Okay.
that to 150 seeds per meter squared, and that's generally speaking about 12 plants per square foot. Let's go.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, 12 plants per square foot for grain production. Fiber production, you might want to get that up to maybe 16 to 18 plants per square foot. And the reason being that the tighter they're seated together, you have a thinner stalk, which is higher quality fiber. Maybe not necessarily, and more fiber per acre in that basis than having the big core type product or
Yeah.
stems.
Let's see here. Have you used soil inoculant on a broad acreage scale? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by soil inoculant. Um, Maybe.
So it's not a nitrogen fixing plant, so there's no
Yeah,
inoculation
I'm
that
not
way.
sure. Maybe Naveed, if you could type a little more, that I think would be helpful. What can we expect for oil amounts per pound of grain produced?
So hemp has about 30% oil um, per seed, I guess, or per percentage of the
Mhm.
crop, right? So in processing, we're able to extract anywhere from 26 to 27%
Mhm.
oil on a per volume basis.
Great. All right. And at what point, I think this is referring to the approved varieties in Canada, at what point do they decide not to require a THC test? 10 years, 5 years?
I think it depends how many either false negatives come in or how that cultivar reacts throughout a growing season. So Finola, which is one of the very first varieties that came into Canada, it always seemed to creep up close to that. And so it only recently, after probably 16, 17 years of testing, was taken off the list, just through additional testing procedures, I guess. And so it really depends on how that variety performs. I don't think there's really a year, but I would suggest that depends on how often it's grown and how popular it is. So if it's a low yielder on grain side and there's not a lot of farmers growing it and there's not a lot of seed production, then we don't have the data that comes in. So it's more on the volume of data that comes in as opposed to the time or the year or how long it takes, if that makes sense. And it's I don't know what Health Canada uses as far as their as far as their the math that they use to do that, but it's sure nice when it does happen. Obviously, because it was costing farmers in our area probably $300 to $400 a field to get it tested, to have somebody come out. You had to be a registered THC sampler to do it properly and to send it in a proper method. So now it's really just up to the pedigreed seed grower to do that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions, as you can imagine, around this. The big push in the US obviously has been CBD production, but starting to think more about, grain and fiber growers and how all this required testing with a much lower value crop play out. Some of the test requirements in different states are quite expensive beyond what you're even, talking about. So,
Yep.
So the question about the soil inoculant was really focused on mycorrhizal inoculants. Have you used any of those, Jeff, and experience?
Not in particular, but we certainly try to be aware of that. And I that's a good research project, actually, Heather, that I would like to see how friendly hemp is to mycorrhizae. And for us, the flax canola rotation is very important. Growing canola ahead of flax is very detrimental to flax, because the canola uses up that mycorrhizae. Canola is not a very mycorrhizae enhancing field. You do it vice versa, and it works well. So I would like to know a little bit more about that, actually. And so that's a good question. Yep.
Yeah, we'll add that to our to-do list. Okay, so do you have a lot of CBD production in your area, and does the pollen, how are people dealing with the pollen issues? But I have a feeling the answer is no, you don't. But
well, to date, and so we just through the last list of approved cultivars, I now have access to the very first high CBD cultivar in Canada, and it's called CBF1. It's a hybrid. It's feminized. The maturity for that crop is probably more suited to just north of you, so Southern Ontario area. And so traditionally, the CBD production in Canada was a field similar to that video that I showed you. So using low CBD dioecious crops, and then just getting a lot of it taken in. You know what I mean? So either collecting the chaff or what have you. So really more of a mechanized system. So it has not been an issue thus far. And I think for the prairies in general, even the CBD production, I don't foresee a lot of what I would call acreage type or orchard style growing for CBD on the prairies. It's probably a variety similar, like say Carmagnola or Abound from US Genetics, that has 5 to 6% CBD, can be harvested mechanically with a stripper header or something. I kind of see that happening a little bit more. And so it hasn't been an issue as of yet, but not to say that, say in Southern Ontario, BC, where they are concentrating more on that orchard style production, that's likely going to be an issue. So for us on the pedigreed side, we have to know if somebody's growing a specific variety. We have regulations that say you cannot grow This variety, if you're producing breeder seed, you have to have a 5 mile radius around that field where no other hemp variety. So it's the same thing. So we're kind of used to that, I guess, is knowing what your neighbor's growing, whether they're into hemp production, and I guess that's kind of the same viewpoint or attitude that has to be taken for CBD and grain, is just try to try to just get along and respect those areas. So, but not always, easier said than done.
Yeah. How do you make hemp hearts? Are they just cold seed? They taste so good, but they're really expensive. Are they profitable to produce?
Well, yes, they're expensive because we pay a lot of money for that. So, and the reason we pay a lot of money is because try to explain. So, as a traditional farmer, to grow hemp, there's a couple things that make it so that you have to have that additional um, premium, I guess, to pay. So there's the fiber at the end of things. So as we move forward into sort of full plant utilization, when we can have the fiber taken off the field and put to use for the thousands of products that we can have for fiber, that's going to help at the bottom line. So that means that we can offer that farmer X amount of dollars for his fiber, X amount of dollars for the fiber. So for the grain, because right now the farmer has to get rid of that fiber out of his field. So that field that you saw, that big video, unfortunately, I have to say, as an agronomist, it just hurts me, but we had to burn that field because we just don't have. Hemp is the strongest naturally occurring fiber in the world, which makes it a lovely product. The shittiest thing about hemp, it's the strongest naturally occurring fiber in the world, and so it's going to wrap on your packers of the cedar and everything else. So there's that added management part, and then just taking that high moisture crop and having to, when you're busy with harvest, you have to rotate those bins. There's more management needed there. So I guess it's kind of a pain in the butt to grow hemp for that purpose. So you have to have that premium price, and that trickles down into the cost of hemp hearts. And so, really, the process is not that onerous or strenuous, whatever word I can try to think of for that. It's really just, again, taking that hemp seed, smashing it against a steel plate, enough to separate it, but not enough to do more damage, and then separate those two. And so it's that part is not, but it's buying that product, convincing a farmer. So now, commodity prices, soybean prices are up. The U.S. might run out of soybeans. We might run out of canola. Those are the crops we compete against. And as they go up in value, then we have to compete with that. So there's a number of different things, of course. Hope a little bit long-winded answer to that question, but.
No, it's good. Any experience with no-till?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and quite successfully again. So the biggest thing is, especially on an established no-till, again, having that proper seed bed is critical, and making sure that the seed is placed. It will outcompete weeds if given the chance, but that's an important thing, again, to keep in mind. But certainly no problem growing hemp in a no-till situation.
Great. Are byproducts like oilseed cake permitted as livestock feed in Canada?
No, not yet. There is some in Europe, and so there is actually a national feed coalition that both U.S. and Canada are working towards, and we have some of our team members on that. The new executive director within the CHJ, which is the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance, comes from a livestock background. So the thought there is that we could bridge some of the data out of Europe, that we can sort of fast track this a little bit. Otherwise, it's, again, very costly and very time consuming to do those animal trials. But it's not legal at this point in time on either side of the border.
All right. Let's see. It's 1 o'clock. Do you have a couple more minutes, Jeff, or do you need to hop off?
No,
okay.
No, I'm good.
All right. Anything particular, I guess, about sampling hemp for THC testing? timing. You'll have a flower head with seed in your sample baggie. Like, it's a little bit different, I think, thought process than people are thinking for CBD hemp.
Yeah, so I guess I would consider it a luxury in the U.S. where you can sample at the time that you want to sample, and then you have the restriction of having to harvest within a window after that. And in Canada, we have to harvest essentially when the cannabinoid production is at its peak, and that's what keeps us in that regulation. And so that's what gives us the opportunity to take those varieties off of a THC testing or exempt, or to put them on the exempt list. So essentially when the cannabinoid production is at its highest, so for us it's kind of that third week of August. And you're absolutely right, so you take the top 10 inches of a crop, you have to sample at least 60 plants in a W pattern within the field, to represent the complete field, and have the mixture of both the what we call the sugar leaves, I guess, and then the fan leaves, and strip that from the stalk. So we absolutely have seed in there. We've got and the two types of different leaf types, I guess, though some that have the higher cannabinoid content and others. So it's more of a combination, but it has to be done at a specific plant maturity level, not at a calendar date.
Great. And let's see. Any experience using like companion crops, like growing annual ryegrass or some other crops with the hemp seeding?
We're working more and more towards that. One of the ones, as hemp genetics, we're looking at getting into additional pulse crops also. So one that I thought that kind of fits in nicely is faba beans, actually. So faba bean is a legume. The seeding date, can be varied, I guess. There's two very distinct different seed sizes there, so it's for ease of cleaning. You've got that legume in there, but we've had growers also grow companion crop oats with hemp, and it definitely helps, particularly in organic situations, definitely helps with disease control. Also, harvesting that extra oats, I guess, just helps kind of move the fiber through the combine a little bit easier. So that's another one. Heather, I always say these, but
I know.
more room for research. But yeah, absolutely. There's an
So you're
opportunity.
talking about like having two actual crops in the field, where one, a crop maybe that benefits some of the shortcomings of hemp a little bit. So oats can fill in those wet spots, kind of thing,
Absolutely.
and also, like you said, drier, flows through the combine better. Yeah, harvested, I guess, roughly around the same time. Roughly.
Yeah, that's
Interesting.
that's the trick, of course, with any, and that's the way I kind of looked at that for companion. If there's another angle to that, then I can identify, I guess, as far
I
as
think, I think just thinking about understory, or just, we're dealing with stands, getting good stands.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, and some of it I think is really learning the crop and all the particulars about it. We tend to have really wet springs, and so that's made it really hard on people to get the hemp planted and then out of the ground, in a solid stand, which I think, to me, just seems like if you can accomplish that, have all these other benefits, like less than.
Yeah.
But getting to that point seems to be a pretty significant challenge here anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see here. We got a couple more questions. How much filtration does hemp oil require to be table ready oil?
There's two ways to look at it. So you definitely have, I guess, particulates within. There was that one picture we had all of our presses there, and there's definitely so. Personally, ourselves, we run it through a filtration system. There's another company that we work with that does some toll processing for us that just basically uses gravity. So just have it sit in a vat for a period of time, and then all the whatever you want to call it, I guess the plant parts essentially settle to the bottom. So that could take up to 10 days, I guess. So yeah, it depends on on the oil temperature, a number of different things, but ours goes right from those presses in through a filtration system, forced through, and then it's table ready right then.
Great. All right. Let's see. Anything else? We have one last. Just where the hemp oil industry is going in the future.
Well, I like that question because I think naturally, I think CBD is going to be great, but I think we can overproduce on the CBD side very quickly until it becomes a commodity that you get it in virtually everything, which is kind of going that way. Like I think I saw a CBD pillow advertised at one point, whatever that gives you. So but I don't think it's going to be too difficult to meet the demands of that. Whereas I think the grain and fiber industry are sort of the longevity of the crop, and as we get to utilize that more. So now on the oil side of things, there's with your new administration, we won't get political, but with your new administration and their view on renewable, I guess, resources, the fact of biofuel is probably going to become quite important once again. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interest in hemp to be used as that, and as a carrier, and just as people again learn a little bit more about the nutritional benefits of the oil, it's only going to get bigger, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. And there's definitely growing interest, as you I'm sure realize in the States as well, and even in
Yeah.
small little places like Vermont.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's all our questions. Thanks, Jeff. This is great. It was good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Good to catch up. The olive oil, for whatever reason, my brain just had a hiccup there, but that's the competitor, right? So
Oh,
it's to be
there you
used
go.
more as an olive oil. So thanks very much for the opportunity, Heather. Great to see you again. And
Yeah, well,
anytime.
yeah, we'll have you hopefully in Vermont next year instead
Yeah.
of this.